This is a story about a couple who worked very hard to achieve the good life, the perfect relationship, and children that love them and bring them joy. But as they say, money can't buy happiness, and you can only hide your secrets for so long. This video is intended for educational and documentary purposes. The content within this video contains themes that some individuals may consider triggering, offensive, or disturbing. The intent is not to disrespect viewers or any individual spoken about herein. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to meet you. As usual, or if you're new, I will be going into detail about what happened to the victims, who they were, and what led up to these horrific circumstances. I'm always working on sharpening my skills when it comes to paying attention to detail and uncovering facts that could be hidden a little deeper within the story. And speaking of which, I don't know if you've ever heard of June's Journey, but I do want to thank them for sponsoring today's video. June's Journey is a hidden object murder mystery game you can download for free on Android and iOS devices. The story is set in the 1920s. You play a character named June who's on a mission to uncover clues related to the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of her sister Claire and Claire's husband. Interesting fact, my mother's name is Claire and it's spelled the exact same way. With every scene, you're given the task of finding different objects that end up becoming clues about what happened to Claire. Others just end up revealing things about June's family's hidden secrets, which are also very interesting. This is where attention to detail plays a role. Your ability to identify, remember, and quickly piece things together helps the story to unfold. I love taking a break to play June's Journey because as much as it challenges me, it is also very rewarding every time I unlock a new level, and it relaxes me and lets me get away from heavy topics. With the music, the beautiful visuals, the little sound effects when you find a new clue, everything just makes me come back to the game anytime I need a break from writing my scripts or researching cases. I'm excited for you to try it, so go to the link in my description box below or the pinned comment and download June's Journey for free. It's available on Android and iOS mobile devices as well as PC through Facebook Games. Feel free to share a screenshot of your progress on Instagram and tag me because I'd love to see where others are in the game. Thanks again to June's Journey. Now let's get into the details of today's story. Richard Handcuffed was born July 30th, 1942. His family migrated to Cleveland, Ohio in the 19th century and settled near the shore of Lake Erie. Dawn Elaine Reinhard was born on February 2nd, 1944, also in Ohio, just northeast of Marion. On September 19th, 1964, Richard and Dawn got married. Richard was 22 and Dawn was only 20. They were a young, happy couple looking forward to spending the rest of their lives together. Richard was attending Ohio State University. He was earning his bachelor's degree in physiological chemistry in 1965 and working on his PhD. A couple years after they were married, the couple began trying to conceive a child. Richard had just graduated with his PhD in physiological chemistry, and he was conducting research in biophysics. He was doing this at a laboratory at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons as a research associate. Unfortunately, by the time Dawn was 26, she still hadn't conceived, even after trying for a few years. At this point, the couple began to consider adoption, and they didn't have to wait long. They were told a 5-month-old baby boy was available, and they jumped at the chance to meet him. Dawn was smitten right away. She cradled this beautiful brown-eyed little boy in her arms and never wanted to let him go. The baby was born on August 7th, 1970. His biological mother delivered him at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York, but was admitted under a false name. As soon as she gave birth, she ran out of the hospital and abandoned her son. He spent the first 5 months of his life in foster care while the state tried to locate his biological parents. This was not successful, therefore, he was officially put up for adoption. In February 1971, Dawn and Richard adopted the baby when he was only 6 months old, and they named him Matthew Eric Handcuffed. Dawn felt like she was absolutely made to be a mother, and she spent all of her time being a stay-at-home mom while Richard focused on his scientific research. To their surprise, just a couple months after the adoption, Dawn found out she was pregnant. It was a miracle. They couldn't believe it. They always wanted a big family, but they never thought that this would ever be possible, especially after trying for so long. It's actually been said that once couples stop trying, sometimes things just happen naturally on their own, and that's what seemed to happen for the Heikkilahs. Dawn was a few months pregnant already when she found out, and she was just so busy with baby Matthew, she hadn't noticed. Soon they found out it was going to be another baby boy, and Dawn and Richard were so happy. The brothers would be best friends, they would have one another to play with and grow up together. Plus, Dawn didn't have to do much to welcome their second son into the world since she already purchased and was gifted so many baby toys and items. It was very easy for her to transition from one boy to two. Joshua David Heikkila was born on November 15th, 1971. The boys were just over a year apart, with Matthew being 15 months old, so they were raised like twins, sharing everything, spending every waking moment together. Something to keep in mind is that the first 5 years of life is what is referred to as the formative years. These are the years in which a child experiences rapid cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development. In these first 5 years of life, experiences and relationships actually stimulate a child's development. It makes millions of connections in their brains, and they develop these connections faster in the first 5 years than at any other time in their entire lives. This is the time when the foundations for learning, health, and behavior throughout life are laid down. The reason I'm mentioning this is because with two very young children close in age to raise at the very same time, one that's biological and one that's adopted, there is a chance that parents' attention can be split between the two. And though it may not be on purpose, it may be easier and more natural to focus more attention on the biological child. Most times after giving birth, a newborn needs a lot of attention from their mother. They need the skin-to-skin contact, the breastfeeding, the coddling, whereas an adopted child that's already an infant or toddler is past those stages. It's a delicate balance. Bonding takes time, and it may be harder for an adoptive parent to feel the same bond with their adopted child. It's no fault of their own, it's merely how we are wired. This is not to say an adoptive parent won't and can't love their adopted child just as much, if not more, than their biological children. The other child that never got to bond with their own biological mother may feel that lack of attention, even though it's only subconscious. Some adopted children experience what's known as attachment trauma. According to Bright Quest Treatment Center's, attachment trauma is a disruption in the important process of bonding between a baby or child and his primary caregiver. It can be as simple as a lack of attention or affection, though the consequences of attachment trauma are far-reaching and long-lasting. Matthew had been abandoned. He never attached to a biological mother. He was given to nurses, then to the state, and eventually to foster care, finally to Dawn and Richard. A friend of the family, Susan Whitaker, said that Dawn was a nearly perfect parent. She was willing to lay down her life for Matthew and Joshua. The family spent 8 years living in Hohokus, New Jersey. It's a quaint little tight-knit town in Bergen County. The population 10 years ago was only a little over 4,000 people. It's primarily an upper class and upper middle class community, and it's known to be one of the best places to live in New Jersey. From a young age, it was apparent that the Heikkila boys were very different. Not only in the way that they looked, Matt having dark brown hair, olive skin, and dark, almost black eyes, and Josh with the blonde hair, fair skin, and big blue eyes, but also different in the way they acted. Matt was very quiet and preferred to be by himself, whereas Josh was happy and always smiling and seemed to like being close to his family and friends. A neighbor and very good friend from right across the street, Mrs. Schaefer, came running over to the Heikkilahs with her newborn daughter, just a few weeks old, in her arms, holding Matt, only 2, firmly by the wrist, with her 4-year-old Kenny in tow. The mother was furious, and she told Dawn that Matt had stuffed her newborn's mouth full of rocks. Though frightened and upset, Dawn and Mrs. Schaefer chalked it up to the boys innocently playing, and sometimes the playing got out of hand, especially when Matt was around. During summer camp, when Matt was only 4, the director pulled Dawn aside to let her know he was really hard for the counselors to handle. He had actually bitten and kicked a little girl, and months earlier, he had been abusive to her little brother, who was a preschool classmate of Matt's. She explained that Matt was always picking fights with kids, and he seemed to be aggressive for no reason. Dawn insisted she was going to take care of it, but it didn't seem to change anything. His behavior just seemed to get worse. The next summer, a mother called to let Dawn know Matt had stabbed her son in the stomach with a pitchfork while they were playing in the backyard. And I'm sitting there thinking, who's watching these kids though? Dawn was not concerned. She thought boys will be boys. In 1979, Richard's research took him to the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. So his family moved to Bernards Township. It's known as a charming town, rich with history, breathtaking, beautiful scenery, and a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The residents are known for their community spirit and volunteerism. Sounds like somewhere you would live in a fairy tale. The Heikelas moved into a big 3,000 square foot, 2-story home with 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a recreation room, fireplace, spacious, gorgeous front porch, great for morning coffee and a rocking chair, a 2-tiered wooden back deck, which was perfect for entertaining, and they had a basketball hoop at the end of their driveway. It was a dream home and ideal for the boys and their parents. The Heikelas fit right in, and they became very popular in their neighborhood of Basking Ridge. They were known to invite anyone and everyone over to their large, beautiful home for barbecues, and neighbors recalled the family would even come over to everyone's houses and sing Christmas carols during the holidays. There was one neighbor, though, that had a little bit of a different perspective. His name was Chris Schmidt. He met the family when Matt was about 10, and he said there was something off about him. He was really quiet. He was too quiet, and he would stare at you and say nothing, and it seemed like he was staring right through you. Chris said he just seemed different. And it was around this time that Matthew's problems became more apparent. Richard was gone a lot for his job, and his hard work actually paid off. He was awarded the Javits Neuroscience Award in 1987. It's one of the most prestigious awards granted by the National Institutes of Health. From the outside looking in, the Heikelas seem to have the perfect all-American family, don't they always? As the boys got older and were in school full-time, Dawn began to study to obtain her real estate license and eventually started working as a realtor in their wooded upscale suburb. It didn't take long for Dawn to become very successful, but that meant less time devoted to the boys. And this may have affected Matt because when he was only 12, he was already getting in trouble with the law. He was rebelling. The police were sent to the Heikelas' house to confront Matt and his parents about Matt riding a dirt bike illegally on a road near their house. A neighbor was outside later that afternoon, and she actually heard Dawn crying in the backyard. She went over there and asked her if everything was okay, and Dawn admitted she was stressed. She didn't know what to do. She could not handle Matthew. The neighbor comforted her and told her it was probably a phase and Matt would be likely to grow out of it. Unfortunately, not much changed. It seemed like Matt wasn't scared of punishment or authority. Visits by the police became more and more frequent and more serious over the years. And Dawn and Richard tried their very best. They knew Matt was troubled, but they didn't understand where his anger was coming from. However, there was a common theme. He was extremely jealous of Josh. It started pretty early on when the boys were around kindergarten age. Yes, brothers can be jealous of one another. Maybe one gets a better toy for Christmas. The other one maybe gets a better seat on an airplane, that sort of thing. But this wasn't the normal sibling rivalry. Matt would throw full-on temper tantrums when he wasn't getting enough attention. He would get in fights with Josh, screaming that his parents didn't love him. They had not told Matt that he was adopted, but kids are smart and they can sense things, and Matt would continuously ask his family why he did not look like them. I don't know whether I agree with this or not because I've never had experience as an adoptive parent, but they lied to him. They continued to make excuses like he inherited his father's genes. It wasn't a secret for long. And once Matt knew the real story about how Dawn and Richard had longed for their own child before adopting Matt, he felt like he didn't have a purpose within the family. Once Josh, the miracle child, was born, Matt felt he was old news. Matthew would purposely separate himself from his family, and it made it really hard to bond with him. It was also really hard for him to make friends at school, so he became more and more antisocial. It didn't help that Josh never got in trouble. Maybe it was by nature, or maybe he saw the way Matt was acting and he was learning from his big brother's mistakes. But this only made Matt angrier because it seemed like Josh could do no wrong. While Matt's teachers were having conferences with his parents about him being out of control in class, Josh's teachers were sending home letters praising Josh for how smart he was and well-behaved and talented he was. It seemed it was true though. Richard, Don, and Josh were all overachievers by nature. They liked things tidy and organized. And Matt, he just tried to get by with mediocre grades. His room was always a mess. He was just different. Josh was also very tall. He was athletic, won many awards for his athleticism, and Matt was shorter. He had no coordination. He didn't excel at sports unless committing crime is considered a sport. When the boys were still in elementary school, the parents took classes to learn how to deal with Matthew's behavior, and despite their very best efforts to treat the boys the same, Matt still believed they favored Josh no matter what they did. There were times when Josh would instigate Matthew, but it was only when the boys were already fighting and at odds. In these moments, the fact that Matt was adopted did get thrown around in petty arguments, but it affected Matt way deeper than anyone could have imagined. Matt did grow up to become a handsome teenage boy. He had a big white smile, dimples in his cheeks, and he certainly had one talent, and that was attracting females. While Josh was focused on church and school and sports, Matthew had that bad boy sex appeal. In school, Matt got a lot of attention from girls. He seemed thrilling to them at first, but many of the relationships wouldn't last long because they usually found some kind of flaw in him, whether it was his pathological lying, his stealing, his failing grades. He just wasn't right for them. That didn't stop women from falling for him though, because he had this ability to come off as very charismatic and charming. He was still getting in trouble though, so the family tried counseling together. They loved Matthew. They just didn't know how to prove it to him. They tried medications and behavioral therapy, and even decided to have Matt go through programs at a few psychiatric facilities. They thought this may change some of his bad habits and hopefully get through to him. One thing that friends of the family noticed though was that the Heikkilahs were very lenient on the boys. They would let Matt's behavior slide all the time. But also noted that Don had tried disciplining Matt too, and it seemed like it had no effect on his behavior either way. All the counseling and treatments were very expensive, and it didn't seem to help. However, it did prove that Matt never felt like he fit in anywhere, including his own home. He told one psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Sadoff, that he could tell there was favoritism towards Josh, and he couldn't get over it. I really wish Matt could have found his identity through something else. It seems like he was so invested in this identity as it related to his family, but he was old enough to make a life for himself aside from all of that as he became an adult. However, you will learn more about the reasons he was unable to do so, most of which had to do with addiction. The Heikkilahs feared if they didn't do something more, Matt could go even more astray. They transferred him to a private high school called Bailey Ellard in Madison for a year. They were hoping these teachers would give him one-on-one attention, but it didn't help. Matt ended up dropping out of school. He did end up earning his GED, but Josh, on the other hand, graduated valedictorian of his senior class. Tell me, do you have a sibling that just seems to be able to do no wrong and is just perfect? Let me know, because I know this is a common theme. Josh even appeared in the Morris County newspaper, along with an article he was interviewed for. It read, "The class valedictorian, Joshua Heikkila, said throughout his high school education, he grew and learned to look at people openly. He added, people have special talents that make them great." I wonder if Josh looked hard enough to see anything good about his own brother. One of Joshua's favorite quotes was printed in the yearbook under his senior picture, and it said, "One ought every day, at least once, to hear a little song, read a good poem, see a fine picture, and if possible, to speak a few reasonable words." Matt's was, sometimes you have to lose to win. When Matt was 18, he was arrested after he tried to impersonate a police officer. He grabbed someone at the mall, put their hands behind their back, and handcuffed them. That same year, he faced contempt of court charges, and 1 year later, at only 19, he already had several warrants out for vehicular violations. The fact that the Heikelas knew Matt was jealous and felt like he was second best, they tried to overcompensate and would hardly punish him for the bad behavior. They thought he was just acting out because he needed more attention, so they would almost praise him after these incidents occurred. For that moment, when he was in trouble, he would get his parents' full attention. They couldn't just ignore him when there were police standing at their door. Things started to really go downhill for Matt after high school. He was still living at home, but he didn't follow any rules. He'd be out all night partying and taking drugs, specifically Valium, in large doses. This was possibly to numb his pain and forget that he didn't belong. Not only that, Matthew's relationships with women were out of control. He had a huge issue with abandonment, and if a woman tried to dump him, he would become unhinged. He would threaten to take his own life or even theirs. Women felt trapped. They didn't want to be with him once they noticed his true colors coming through, but they were too terrified to leave. He had the ability to fake being very friendly at first, and the fact that he came from a wealthy family helped because he would buy them gifts. He would take them on trips. He would do all this on his family's credit card without their permission. Most of the time, Matt did not have his own money. He just jumped from one odd job to the next. Meanwhile, Josh was applying to Ivy League colleges and getting his father's praise and attention all the time. This, of course, caused Matt to have a growing hatred towards Richard. In the summer of 1988, the family gathered around the dinner table. Dawn walks over and hands Josh an envelope addressed to him, and it's from Dartmouth. He had applied months earlier, and they were about to find out if he got in. It was an exciting moment in Josh's life, and it would be for anyone who worked as hard as he did. It's also an exciting moment for his parents. Matt just couldn't let Josh enjoy this moment. He just kept telling him, "Open the stupid envelope already," and continued to make rude remarks like, "It's not a big deal. Why would anyone want to go there anyway? I hate school. We all know Mr. Perfect got into Dartmouth, so why are we even standing around like it's some kind of big surprise? Just open it up so we can move on and eat." Super rude and inconsiderate. Of course, his parents were excited for Josh. They wouldn't let Matt ruin that moment, and Josh did get accepted. They all cheered, and they were so happy for him, except for Matt, who sat there stone cold. Instead of being happy for his brother, he turned around and just stormed off. In the summer of 1989, when Matt was 19, he started dating a girl from Ecuador. By November, he asked her to marry him. She said that she had to ask her parents for permission, so he used his parents' credit card and they took a trip to Ecuador. However, his girlfriend's parents forbid her to marry Matt after finding out he had lied about his age. He claimed he was 24. He was only 19, and Matt was livid. Instead of dealing with his emotions in a mature, healthy manner, Matt tried to take his life by swallowing painkillers and shooting Valium into his veins. He was rushed to the hospital, and they end up saving his life. He flew home, and guess who was waiting for him at the airport? Dawn and Richard. They checked him in at Overlook Hospital for treatments, but he escaped. A nurse was trying to stick a syringe into his arm, and he violently ripped it out and ran. That night, he never came home. He slept over a friend's house, and he was running with a bad crowd, so he was back abusing drugs. His drug abuse ends up leading to full-on hallucinations. He was super paranoid, and he told doctors and his family that a Colombian drug dealer was after him. This is what led him to purchase a handgun for protection. He paid $650 for a Beretta. Here he is, mentally unstable, and now he has a weapon. Not a good combo. On December 3rd, 1989, Matt called the Bernards Township Police, saying that someone was after him. The police called Richard and told him, "You need to come home and tend to your son." His dad was super embarrassed because at this point, Dawn and Richard were prominent figures in their community. Most people in the neighborhood did not like Matt. They got a bad feeling about him. They knew he was unstable, but it was hard because they liked the Heikelas. Therefore, they were willing to accept Matt and, pretend there wasn't something wrong with him. Dawn was working for Bergdorf Realtors as a top saleswoman. She was also a member of the state's $1 Million Sales Club. Everyone seemed to know her because she sold most of the families their homes in Basking Ridge. At this point, Richard was highly respected. He was revolutionizing the research and treatment for Parkinson's disease. He, alongside his research team, produced extremely important studies that are still being used today. And at the time, they were on the cutting edge of what causes Parkinson's and how to treat it, and even close to possibly finding a cure. Richard truly was leading the research in these areas, and ironically, he was also studying brain injuries suffered by drug users, yet here he was put off by Matt's addiction and didn't want it to reflect poorly upon him, especially because he had just recently taken a position as a professor of neurology and pharmacology at the research institution. So he was new to this position and he didn't want anything to tarnish his name. Don was always patient with Matt, but over the years, Richard had enough. He came home from work that afternoon and confronted Matt about calling the police and his claims of being stalked. This is the moment Richard found out that Matt had a gun. Earlier that morning, Matt was rummaging through the house. He was looking for cash and credit cards, and he ends up stumbling upon a letter that's in Josh's room. It was written by his mother and sent to Josh last summer when Josh went away to summer camp. The minute Richard walked through the door, and before he could confront Matt about the call, Matt cornered him in the kitchen and was yelling at him over this letter. He insisted the letter proved everything he had suspected. They loved and cared about Josh way more than him. His father told him not to be ridiculous. It was merely a letter, and had Matt been away at summer camp, they would have written him a letter too. Instead, Matt chose to be out getting in trouble, and it was his actions that put him in the position he was in. But Matt never took responsibility. He blamed his parents for everything that went wrong in his life, and this moment was no different. He starts reading the letter out loud to his father, and he did it in this condescending manner. "Dear Josh, your father and I want you to know we are so happy that you made National Honor Society." So anytime Richard tried to interrupt and explain away each part of the letter, Matt would yell at him to shut up, and he would move closer and closer to Richard, and he just kept reading the letter. "But what we're most proud of is the fact that you're turning out to be a caring, responsible, and kind person." As Matt was reading the letter, his anger was getting more and more out of control, and he moved closer and closer. He got right up into his dad's face, and he was so close, he was spitting on his dad while he was yelling. Richard was trying to keep calm, but Matt just kept saying, "You don't love me. You don't care about me. You never had." And he wanted Richard to say it to his face, to finally admit he didn't love Matt. Instead, Richard was still trying to tell him how much they did love him. It didn't help. Matt just grew increasingly irritated, and he kept screaming in Richard's face to stop interrupting him, and that's when he pulled out the Beretta. He pointed it at Richard and screamed for him to shut up and listen. Richard put his hand up in front of his face and said, okay, I'm listening, please stop." He said, "I love you. Your mother loves you, Josh loves you." But right when Richard uttered the name Josh, Matt cocked the gun and came closer to him and told him, "If you say the name Josh one more time, I will blow your head off." Richard told him he would never say it again. Then Matt took the gun and started to point it at himself, and he threatened to take his own life. Richard saw this opportunity to grab the cordless phone that was sitting on the kitchen counter, and he called 911. Matt was still screaming at the top of his lungs and saying how embarrassing it would be for the community to find out that Matt took his life because his family never loved him. Richard was on the phone with the 911 operator, and he's quickly trying to tell the operator that his son had a gun and was threatening him. All the while, the operator could hear Matt in the background. They could hear Matt asking his dad, "How would it feel if I blew my head off and the family would have to sit down in this kitchen knowing that my brains had been scattered all over the place?" He once again pointed the gun at Richard, but heard the operator say that the police would be there any minute. Matt was no stranger to the police, so he gave up and he walked away. Richard was still on the phone, and he was scared that Matt really was going to take his own life, so he started chasing after him. Matt made it to the front door, and all of a sudden you hear shots ringing out one after the other after the other. Richard was sure that Matt was dead, so he yelled into the phone, "Send paramedics." When he got outside, he saw Matt shooting up the Toyota Corolla that they had purchased for him when he turned 16. Matt ends up putting 13 bullets into his own car. He was arrested, taken into custody, and the Heikelas begged police not to charge him with anything. Instead, they said, please admit him to the Carrier Clinic. It was a private psychiatric hospital. But against his parents' wishes, the police charged him with making terroristic threats against Richard, and bail was set at $25,000. Get this. His parents, of course, bailed him out, but then they actually hire a defense attorney to help get the charges dismissed and prove drug-induced insanity. It worked. Of course it did. When you have the money and can afford a good defense attorney, sometimes you can get away with things. When he was in the institution, he admitted to Dr. Sadoff that when he went back to Ecuador, he watched the movie Back to the Future. And this is when he thought that Arab terrorists were coming after him driving a Volkswagen minibus. And that's what set all of this into motion. And I wanted to laugh, but then I have to stop and remind myself that this is real to Matthew. As much as it seems funny to us, when an individual is having these delusional hallucinations, it is real to them. The agreement with the court was if he could stay off drugs and continue getting counseling, he could be released. The doctor told his parents that his prognosis would be good if he could stay away from street drugs. Matt was released after 6 weeks. His parents thought perhaps getting a job would encourage him to change and bring in some extra money for him to attempt to support himself and move on in life. This way he would become a stable adult, but the added pressure of holding down a job and the rules that it entailed put him into another tailspin. One afternoon, his parents found him unresponsive on the floor of his bedroom. This time, they admitted him to Somerset Medical Center, and he stayed there for 2 weeks. After this episode, he told doctors he didn't remember anything, including when he threatened his dad with the Beretta. Doctors told his parents that he may have carried out some of his actions because he had psychotic paranoid delusions, plus auditory hallucinations. He couldn't think clearly. He wasn't a healthy, rational person. He did not understand or appreciate the danger of his actions because of his paranoid fears. I always think it must be scary for you to almost be trapped inside your mind, to not know that you're not stable, to be living in this alternate reality almost. Doctors said that Matt should be treated as mentally ill and be prescribed antipsychotic medications rather than trying to treat him as a criminal. He said he should not be allowed to possess any substances or weapons since his actions were not based in reality. The doctors feared he was going to fatally hurt someone or himself. It seemed like the Heikelas didn't heed this warning. In the next few weeks, the clinic had let them know no one was making sure that Matt stayed on track. No one was monitoring him or whether he was attending clinic for routine treatment and staying off drugs. On one hand, I'm sitting here thinking, yes, his parents should have been on top of that, but he's an adult. However, he's also classified as mentally ill. So does that mean he falls back as his parents' responsibility? Doctors weren't the only ones who warned the Heikela family that Matt was capable of fatally injuring someone. Police told Richard after the incident with the Beretta he had to follow through and do something with more of a severe punishment, like jail, or he was going to, quote, kill you both. Neither parent believed that. They thought he just needed to learn a little more responsibility. So with his parents' help and pull in the community, he lands a pretty decent job as a desk clerk at the Madison Hotel in Morris Township. They even bought him a brand new Jeep so he could drive there for his shifts. But a couple weeks later, he totaled it, flipped it while he was speeding. It frustrates me. I can't help it. Nevertheless, considering some of the other bad things that have happened before, things started to seem like they were looking up. Matt was on a pretty normal schedule. He was waking up on his own, he was going to work, he was meeting new people, making new friends, and he was also dating again. He was with 19-year-old Melanie Glover. She was from about an hour away in Long Branch. Not sure where they met, but in the fall of 1990, she got pregnant. But the problem was Matt was being unfaithful. He was seeing another girl that he was working with at the hotel in October. Her name was Marta Morales, and we will talk about her in a moment. He tells his pregnant girlfriend, Melanie, he's in love with someone else. So you can keep the baby, but I'm out of here. Who was this new girl, Marta, that he was in love with? Well, she was a lovely girl. Her mother was an immigrant from Mexico, very hardworking, and taught Marta to do the same. She was smart, and she was attending St. Elizabeth's University, which was a private Catholic school in Morris Township. She was also on scholarship. Marta was so happy dating Matt. He was her first serious boyfriend. She even introduced him to her mother, which was a pretty big deal. And her mom thought he was a really nice boy, but that Marta had to focus on school and she hoped Matt wouldn't be a distraction. Marta's mother was very strict. And for whatever reason, that made an impression on Matt. He always acted very respectful towards Marta's mom, and it wasn't an act. He actually held her in high regard. He didn't want to make any mistakes, especially because he was in love with her daughter. He always had Marta home on time. He spoiled her with gifts. She really thought she had found the one, a man that was going to help her bring together her goal of living the American dream. The Heikelas were also very happy. They really thought Matt was on the straight and narrow until one afternoon in mid-December 1990. Richard receives a call. It's from the Morris Township Police Department. They inform Richard Matt had stolen $900 from the hotel and he had just been fired. He was charged with theft and they were holding him until Richard picked him up from the police station. Richard could believe it because unlike Don, he doubted Matt would ever be able to live a life void of trouble. When Richard came to get Matt, he claimed he didn't do it, that the hotel didn't like him. They were pinning this on him to get rid of him. The Heikelas said, "We do not care. You're going to have to get another job because you need to pay back the hotel for what you did." And that was perfect because he needed extra money anyway. Christmas was getting closer. Matt had been promising Marta they would spend the night in a 5-star hotel, order room service in the morning, and he'd get her any gift she wanted. He doesn't have enough money. So he asked his mom if he could borrow some. She agrees and asks him, "How much do you need? Is $100 enough?" And Matt just laughs hysterically. He's like, "Mom, come on. It's more like a couple thousand." And his mom is shocked. She says, "I can't do that. It's far too much to spend on a girl you had just started dating a couple months ago." Besides, she mentioned Richard would find out. What do you think happens? Matt goes ballistic. He's screaming at Dawn, asking her why she's so scared of Richard. He tells her, "Think for yourself. Stop letting him make decisions for you." Matt had no choice but to take a job as a cashier at a gas station, which was 30 minutes outside of his community where he wasn't well known. Can you guess? Yeah, it didn't last long. On Christmas Eve, only a couple weeks into his night shift, he was apprehended by Summit Police. He was questioned in connection to a report from the owner that he stole $3,000 from the safe, as well as a recent break-in at a home nearby. I guess he was trying to get that money for Marta's presents. This time, Matt was held in jail for over 10 hours until his parents came to bail him out. Richard wanted to teach Matt a lesson, but Dawn kept begging to go get him. When the police led Matt out to see his parents, Richard didn't even know what to say. He was speechless. Finally, he says to Matt, "You committed a felony, and it carries a 5-year prison sentence." Matt's laughing. He's sarcastically responding with, "Yeah, Dad, but you have one thing wrong. I had nothing to do with it." He's always blaming everything on other people. But he insisted if Richard would just take a look at the facts instead of listening to false narratives that cops were just trying to spin about him, then maybe Richard would see that Matt was innocent. Richard couldn't take it anymore. "My blood's boiling and this isn't even my child." He was just so damn condescending. And it's frustrating that he won't just act like an adult. Richard starts to become angry, raising his voice right inside the police headquarters. He says, "I am looking at the facts, and the fact is you are always getting in trouble." Dawn jumps up. She gets right in the middle of both of them. She looks at Richard and tells him to stop it. Then she puts her hands around Matt's face. And she's just like stroking his cheek and comforting him and saying, "I'm so sorry you had to spend so many hours in jail." While she's, doing this, he looks over at his dad and he's like, "Yeah, Dad, don't you care that I've been locked up for so long for something I didn't do? Why are some people just so easy to want to punch in the face?" Dawn was hugging Matt and she said, "Honey, do you want to go back to Somerset?" That was the psychiatric facility. Matt just lashes out on her and he's accusing her of saying he's crazy. He said, "Are you just trying to send me back to some kind of insane asylum and lock me up forever so you can forget about me and enjoy your life with your real son, Josh?" It was extremely frustrating because Matt was always misinterpreting things. He just angers me so much. Matt figured he would make up for his inability to wine and dine Marta for Christmas and told her he would spoil her for her 20th birthday, which was on January 29th. The plan was Marta goes to Mexico, visits with her family a couple weeks before, then comes back and celebrates together. Marta goes away and Matt is a wreck. He keeps calling and calling and calling and not leaving her alone. She's out enjoying time with her cousins and her friends and her vacation, and he just would not let up, constantly accusing her of sleeping with other men, but the truth was she lost her virginity to Matt. Oh, and he took pride in that. He would bring it up again and again, almost use it against her, kind of like he owned her. On January 10th, he hangs up on her. He called her a slut and once again accused her of being unfaithful. He goes out and purchases a double-barrel 20-gauge shotgun. The next day, he drove over an hour to Melanie's, his pregnant ex's house, and he begs her to marry him. Is this as confusing to you? Because to me, he has this huge fear of abandonment, so much so that he goes back to his ex while assuming Marta is cheating, only for Melanie to completely turn him down. So he goes back to the car, grabs the shotgun, points it in her face, and tells her, "You better get an abortion and never tell anyone that we dated or I'll kill you." Unbelievable. Marta returned the following week and Matt acted like nothing happened, like he didn't call her names, and he just apologizes for accusing her of cheating. He just says, "I just love you so much. It's so hard for me for you to be away. It just makes me crazy." And he's so sorry. Marta hadn't dated before, so she had no experience and didn't know what love was. This wasn't love. It was abuse. He was so manipulating. So much so, the next time she was over, he shows her the shotgun and tells her, "If you ever leave me, I'll blow my head off." I cannot imagine the fear and guilt that I'd be carrying around thinking I may be the reason someone that I love takes their life. That's a big burden for a young girl or just anyone to have to bear. On Monday, January 28th, Marta was worried. She calls Dawn and explains she's concerned for Matt. He's been locked up in his room the whole weekend. He's probably on drugs and he could hurt himself. She doesn't tell his mom about the shotgun though. Maybe she would have taken it just a tad more seriously had Marta admitted that. Dawn attempts to talk to Matt through the door, but he tells her he just needs to get a gift for Marta. It's her birthday and he didn't have any money and he needed to borrow some. So he's back with this again. Dawn gave him the same answer as last time and she left for work. The next morning, Dawn knocked on the door to his room once again to check on him. This time she could hear him crying. He was more vulnerable and he begs her to stay with him. He says he needs her. He's so depressed. He's scared that he might do something stupid and hurt himself. Instead of stopping everything and giving Matt attention, she tells him she's going to be late to a meeting with a client, so she's got to hurry and leave. Matt's emotions are all over the place. He's mad. He's sad. He feels abandoned once again. He's trapped and doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have money. He's depressed. Everything is becoming too much. Not all of us have the same coping skills. Matt goes to the window and he's just watching his mother drive away, thinking that she doesn't really love him. Work was more important than her son. One person cared though, Marta, and today was her 20th birthday, January 29th, 1991. He decides to cheer up and keep his promise. He got excited for what the night would bring. There was one problem. He didn't have money or a car, but he thought of a plan to get what he wanted. Matt made reservations at the famous Windows of the World restaurant located on the 107th floor atop the World Trade Center in New York City. He calls Martha and tells her he would pick her up at 7 o'clock. Look how breathtaking this restaurant was. To think that it all fell to the ground on 9/11 is so sad. The dinners here were from $30 to $50, not including dessert or anything else you wanted, and it definitely wasn't cheap. As honored as Marta was when she realized where Matt had taken her, she kept asking how in the world he was able to afford this. He just smiles and tells her she's worth it. He's complimenting her excessively about how beautiful she looked and how gorgeous she was. But then he brings up the cheating in such a beautiful moment. He just can't help himself. It catches Marta off guard. She's instantly annoyed and upset and frustrated, and she once again tries to explain to him she did not cheat. She looks him in the eye and tells him, "You just imagined all that. It never happened." I'm sure he did not like that. Only Matt's reality matters, though. He goes on to tell her that he can't be away from her. She's just so gorgeous. Then, in a manipulative manner, he says, "What do you expect? Do you blame me for not wanting to lose you?" And this puts it back on her. It can make you feel guilty for getting upset, so he transfers the blame once again. They're getting ready to leave, and he tells her he has one more surprise for her and that this one is really going to blow her mind. She is so excited. She can't wait. She already feels like a princess. They finally get in the car. Marta can't wait to get her surprise. It's around 11 o'clock when they pull up to Matt's house. And she's never been over this late before, so she's scared that his parents are going to see them, sneaking in. Matt assures her she doesn't have to worry about his parents. He tells her to close her eyes, take his hand, not to peek, and follow him upstairs. They get up to the second floor where the rec room was, and Matt told Marta she could look now. It was dim in the room, and at first Marta didn't see anything. She looks over at Matt, puzzled, but then she follows his gaze to the floor, and that's when she saw it. Her brain couldn't process what her eyes were looking at. She can't contain herself, and she lets out this blood-curdling scream. It's a scream of horror and disgust and disbelief, because there, on the rec room floor, is Matt's mother, or at this point, what's left of Matt's mother. She was completely unrecognizable. Her lifeless body is covered in blood, and Marta is so confused. So she's looking at Matt and she's screaming, "That's your mother, Matt! Oh my God!" And he's just staring blankly ahead, like catatonic. And he says, "It is. Are you surprised? That's what a shotgun does to your head. Boom. Bye-bye, Mom." Matt started to walk towards Marta, and he says, "What's wrong, baby? Don't you like it? Well, don't worry. I have another surprise waiting for you." He didn't want her to run, so he took out a pair of handcuffs. He gets one handcuff on her, but she runs. She tries to make her way out from the basement, and that's when she saw Matt's father. His overcoat was still on. He never had a chance to make it all the way inside the house before Matt shot him in the back of the head with the same sawed-off shotgun he used on Dawn. Marta is stunned. She's hyperventilating. She's trapped. She's sick to her stomach. She's gagging. And she's completely terrified. And I can't imagine realizing that the person I thought I loved is an evil, heartless maniac. And all along, I thought he would be my future. It would be as if my future was flashing before my eyes and out like a light. She screamed and screamed. She was shaking on the floor. At this point, he starts making fun of Richard as he's lying there. His life was stolen from him after all he had given Matt, and he's mocking him. It hurts for me to even repeat this, but he was saying things like, "Who's the boss now, Dad? You're not so powerful and smart anymore, are you?" Then he turns and looks straight at Marta and says, "You're next." Unreal. Out of all the cases I've done, this is another one that gives me nightmares. It just makes my skin crawl with disgust. She makes it upstairs, and he pushes her into Josh's room. He throws her on the bed, and he tells her he can't possibly let her go after all she has seen. Then he looks at her with these black, evil, blank eyes. He tells her there are a lot of reasons she needs to die tonight. One is that she's a liar. He loved her, but she never loved him. He wanted her to say it, to say that she loved him, to beg for her life. She was too stunned to even speak, and he just kept going, just screaming in her face, spitting on her as he yelled at her. He told her this would never have happened if she hadn't cheated on him. She tried again to defend herself, but there was no arguing or reasoning with a murderous sociopath. He has to be right. And the more you try to deny his reality, the more angry he becomes. He says, there's no other excuse for her not answering the phone at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. Where was she? Where could she have been? He's like holding onto her arms like this, shaking her. She's bawling. She's shaking. She's nauseous. And she is in utter shock. And she's trying to get the courage to mutter, I was sleeping, Matt. But he's got a one-track mind. And the only thing that's on it is murder. I feel so bad for her. He tells her none of them loved him, that they're all liars. He opens up his closet, he reaches inside, and he pulls out the shotgun. He points it at her. She's crawling across the bed. He comes towards her slowly, cocks the gun, and holds it right in her face. I'm not trying to disrespect anyone. It's just that when I'm reading about these stories, I cannot help but wonder what those last moments must be like right before you take your last breath, especially when you're staring back at someone you love. It's torture. He told her he wanted her to die with good memories, and that's why he took her out to a nice time, knowing that it would be her very last night on earth. She was begging him to spare her life. She told him, I love you so much, so much. Even after everything I saw, I still love you. All the while she is saying this with a shotgun in her face at point blank range. This woman is so strong. She is so courageous. To think she had to use all of the strength in her not to look like she was lying. She knew she had one chance to try to save herself. She slowly puts her hands up in front of her face while tears are just still running right down her cheeks, and she just softly asks him to please put the gun down and talk to her. There was just this silence. He stood there in silence. Imagine not knowing what this man is going to do to you. How much time do you have left? To her surprise, he slowly let the weapon fall to the floor. Then he sits down next to her on the bed. At this point, he does ask her to put her arms out straight in front of her. Of course, she complies, and he handcuffs her right arm to his left arm. She can't escape. He proceeds to tell her that after everything he's accomplished that day, he's exhausted and he needs to get some sleep. This poor young girl has been tricked, lied to, manipulated, has just witnessed not one, but 2 deceased people. She was almost killed, and now she has to sleep with a man that's responsible. She knew this. For now, she was still alive, even if it meant she only had 1 more hour on this earth, even if it was just to feel the warmth of a bed for the very last time, or smell her perfume, or look around at this gorgeous home that became an early grave for Matt's parents. Anything was worth having more time, even pretending to love a monster. He turned the lights out, shotgun by his side, pulls the covers over them, cuddles up next to her, and falls right to sleep. Not Marta. She had to use all of her strength not to scream or cry or try to run, because our instinct is to survive, to retreat. But she had to be smart. She couldn't relax. There was no way she could sleep. She thought he could wake up at any moment, and that would be the end. All night, she's thinking of a way to convince Matt not to take her life. She knew what he was capable of. The next morning, Matt wakes up, he leans over toward her, and he unlocks the handcuffs. Obviously, they have to wash up, they have to go to the bathroom, he needs to as well. And just as she's walking toward the bathroom, he says, Marta, don't do anything stupid. She can't help it though. As soon as she gets out of his sight, she locks the bathroom door behind her, and she falls to the ground on that cold tile, and she just hysterically cries. She also knows she can't waste any time, and she's looking all over the room for a weapon or a way out. There's a window above the toilet, but it's pretty high up. She closes the lid and she steps on top and stretches to reach the windowsill. She's pulling herself up high enough to reach the shutters. They have a latch on them. So she lowers herself back down and she tries again. This time, she unhooks the latch. These shutters swing open so fast that they crash against the wall, making a really loud noise, and she knows Matt heard it. She can hear him somewhere in the bedroom. So she knows if he finds out that she's trying to escape, it is over. She tries to pull herself up again to get to the windowsill, but she slips. It's too far. She can't reach it. She can't balance and try to open it at the same time, and at that moment, he bangs on the door. She nearly falls on her face. He asks what's taking her so long, and she says, I'm just using the toilet. So he tells her to hurry up, and now she realizes there is no way to escape. She has to walk out there and face him once again. She has a plan. She's hoping it's not too late to try one last thing. As soon as she comes out, she pretends to be happy to see him. She tells him how thankful she is that he took her to such a fabulous dinner and that she had the best birthday, pretending she doesn't even remember the other things that occurred that night. His face lights up. It's working. She tells him, I'm so lucky to have you. You know, we should get away together. He stops and he's looking at her and he's like, what do you mean we? She repeats, we, together. Let's just get out of here. Let's fly to Jamaica. Jamaica was a place that Matt really enjoyed. He had stolen his dad's credit cards in the past and stayed there for a while. So she tells him that no one will know them there. They can hurry and leave and start a brand new life, just the two of them. He is standing there silently staring at her for what seems like forever. And then he leans in and he says, okay, we'll leave right now. We'll get to the airport, catch the very first flight out of here to Jamaica. Marta is trying to hold in her excitement because she can't believe it. And she doesn't yet, because at any moment this could be another lie, another way to manipulate her, another way to trick her into thinking he may actually be a normal, kind, loving man. But she takes comfort in what he says for the moment, because remember, she's still alive for now. This buys her more time to figure out how the F to get away from this psycho. Oh, he tells her if she runs, he will do away with her without a second of hesitation. She assures him she doesn't want to leave him. She can't wait to start their new life together. That's survival right there. There's only one issue. Marta obviously didn't come prepared for a trip out of the country. She doesn't have her passport. She's so terrified. She has to tell Matt they need to stop by her house so she can run up to her room and get it, and then they could be on their way. Even if she's scared, that's the truth. His mood has changed, and she's shocked when he actually agrees. He seems happy, he's excited, and he's back to normal, whatever that means. They leave. 45 minutes later, they arrive at Marta's around 8 o'clock in the morning. Matt parks his mom's car, they get out, and he follows her inside. This evil man is only one step behind her. Remember, she hasn't been home all night since he picked her up over 12 hours ago. She hasn't spoken to her parents. Nothing. When her mom hears them come through the door, of course she rushes over to speak with them. Marta is terrified. If her parents get in Matt's way, he will do the same thing he did to his own parents, and probably without even a moment of hesitation. She almost screams, but she knows she has to hold it together for the sake of her mother. He's already mouthing to her to keep her mouth shut. She tries to act completely normal. Matt was actually hoping Marta's parents wouldn't be home. He didn't want to have this confrontation. Remember that he respects Marta's mom. He doesn't want to look bad. His reputation still matters to him, and oddly and ironically, he's actually scared of Marta's mom. She's only 4'11". He's got a weapon in his car 50 feet away, but he stops in his tracks. She's also able to tell that something is not right. There was an unspoken message of fear and concern, and with her motherly instincts, she could probably smell the tension in that room. She starts to yell at Marta. She asks her, "What are you doing home? You have class. Where were you all night? Why didn't you ever come home?" She turns to Matt and she says, "Matthew, what is going on here? What are you doing here at this hour on a school day?" He's in his delusional state and he starts telling Marta's mom that they're actually going on a birthday trip to Jamaica to celebrate Marta's birthday, and she looks at him like he has 5 heads. She's like, "What? You cannot be serious, Matt." She begins to approach him. She's fearless, but then again, she has no idea what he has just done and how close she could be to death. She tells him to go home. She tells Marta, "Go upstairs," Marta's sitting there trying to plead with her, but she's stern. She turns back to Matt once again, and she tells him it's time for him to leave. Marta knows at any second Matt is going to lose it. Her heart is pounding because she can see his jaw tightening up and his fists are rolled up into balls, his eyes just piercing through her mother. Time seems to be going by so slowly until Matt lets out a breath and he says, "Fine, I'll go." Shocked, Marta watches him start to turn around. Then he stops. He comes back over to her and he whispers in her ear, "I should have blown your fucking head off when I had the chance." Turns back around and swiftly walks right out the door. I'm shocked too. But what might not be apparent is that Matt wasn't used to someone challenging him. His parents never stood up to him like that. Matt could easily manipulate everyone around him, but inside, he was truly a weak coward. He was no mental match for Marta's mom. As soon as the door closes, Marta falls to the ground. She's hysterically crying. Her mom shuts the door and she locks it. She can't breathe. She can't get out a word. She's absolutely inconsolable, but before she can even tell her mom what happens, the phone rings and Marta jumps up. She's startled. She lets out a scream and she runs and picks it up, and she knew it. It was Matt from his mother's car phone outside. He threatens to kill her and her whole family if they call the police. She stays quiet. She just lies to her mom and says they broke up, and that's why she's so upset. I would be so scared. That day was Wednesday, and while all of this is going on, a few of Dawn's coworkers notice that she's late to a meeting with one of her clients. They try to call her on the car phone, and that's when they knew something wasn't right because Matt was forbidden to drive his mother's new Audi. Matt makes up a story. He says Josh has been in a terrible car accident and the whole family was driving to the university right now. Her coworkers were not buying it. Remember, people knew Matt wasn't well. They weren't stupid. They didn't like him. They drive over to the house and a note is on the door with the same message in Matt's handwriting. It just seemed off. Why wouldn't the Heikkilahs just call and explain? The friends call the police, and then the police also call the university to find out what's going on. And what's crazy is that Josh was supposed to be on his way home the day before. Yeah. Wow. The police were now inside the Heikkilahs' house where they discovered the carnage at 2:20 p.m. Matt was nowhere to be found. What was found were 2 shotgun shells, and etched into their soft metal with precision was the word mom on one of them and dad on the other. You cannot say, after seeing that this was not premeditated. I'm going to tell you more of the details about what exactly happened later. Marta had stayed quiet like Matt requested, and it wasn't until an APB was put out for Matt that a police officer recognized him and knew that he was dating Marta. He alerts the police and they arrive at her house and attempt to question her, but at first she wouldn't speak. I probably wouldn't either. She couldn't speak. She was still in shock. They didn't know what happened to her. They had no idea what she had been through. And they didn't find out until she felt safe. They told her there are a ton of police cars outside. You're going to be okay. She finally admits to them what happened that night. And then she says he's probably on his way to Jamaica. On Thursday morning, police locate the 1989 Audi at the Newark International Airport. Later, they traced Matt's movements to a small town that was 60 miles away from Montego Bay. He had checked into a very small little bed and breakfast so that he could stay hidden called Miss Mary's Place. It did take 6 days, though, for Jamaican police to locate him. And by then, he had already settled down into his new life. He had been shopping, eating at nice restaurants, even grabbed drinks with a few women, all on his dead father's dime. Unfortunately for him, he left a really bad impression the last time he was there, and a cop remembered him from a moped accident when he saw the federal warrant that was out for his arrest now. He alerted the FBI, and they busted into Matt's hotel room and apprehended him. On February 15th, 1991, Somerset County Grand Jury indicted Matt, only 22 years old, on capital murder charges for the deaths of his parents, as well as kidnapping and attempted murder of Marta. He was in jail pending a $2.5 million bail. His poor parents were not there to bail him out this time. Both Josh and Marta were now in protective custody. As his trial began on November 12, 1992, a lot of details started to emerge, and I will share many of them with you. There was no question that Matt had killed his parents, but there was one thing that remained at issue, and that was whether he was insane or not. This was the same court and the same judge, Michael R. Imbriani, that found Matt not guilty by reason of insanity. And that was only a year earlier when he threatened to shoot his dad with the Beretta. Now what? Matt had actually followed through. Wouldn't that mean his insanity was the cause? That's what the defense said. Shortly before his court appearance, Matt said he felt absolutely terrible for what happened. He wished he could talk to his parents. He said, "I was going to call my mom, but then I realized I couldn't. When I sit down and think about it, I freak out and my emotions run wild." Do you believe him? He also began writing letters while he was in jail. He wrote them to Josh, Marta, and also various news outlets. In one of the letters, which was for Fox News, he stated, quote, "I guess the reason I did not kill Marta was because I did not have any shells left. I would have shot her in the stomach so I could watch her die slow and painful death. She deserved it." Why does this young girl deserve that? Because he really thinks that she cheated on him, even if she did. Really? Then he goes on to brag about the fact that he once escaped a prison sentence because of being legally insane, and he was going to do it again. The jury was made up of 9 men and 3 women. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty because they claimed Matt ambushed his parents while robbing them because he wanted to obtain the money in the car to take Marta out for her birthday. If that's not insane, I don't know what is. But aside from the legalities, everyone who knew Matt and his history knew this was not just about wanting to take his girlfriend out. The prosecution still needed a motive to get beyond the insanity defense. So they decided to claim felony murder, committing a homicide during a dangerous felony, a robbery, rape, arson, kidnapping, for example, all of those fit. This would justify the death penalty. It was better for the prosecution if the motive was money and not hatred for his adoptive parents, because then all the anticipated psychological testimony from the expert witnesses and all the counselors that treated Matt would become relevant, and therefore it would circle back to the insanity plea. Now at trial, the details emerged. There was a videotape of the crime scene submitted as evidence. It was played for the entire courtroom. It was said to be surreal. It was just like a home movie. It starts out showing this beautiful suburban home, unwashed dishes still in the sink, sports trophies lining the walls, and holiday decorations still here and there. Then the camera pans over to 2 dead bodies. There were also very graphic and up-close photos of the victims, including one of Dawn, that many people who loved her could not look at, because the reality was you couldn't even make out what you were looking at. It just seemed like a whole bunch of raw meat. Only a third of her skull was left, and it was said that because of the damage, she was shot at point-blank range. It was also revealed that Matt had named the shotgun LB, which was short for left behind. What do you think the symbolism is there? Police had found an undated handwritten note from Matt. The note said he originally planned to kill his girlfriend and then commit suicide, and that Marta wanted to die. And once she did, he couldn't go on. He explained this was a pact, and this was a goodbye letter. He apparently tore up the letter and threw it away, but since it was eventually found in Dawn's things, the theory was she had found it, confronted him, and that's what led to the Heikkala's deaths. I'm not so sure. The last words he said to each of his parents were, "I hate you," before pulling the trigger. He explained that he lured his parents home by telling them he was dating 2 women and got one of them pregnant, and he didn't know what to do. His mom arrived first. He was hiding upstairs, and he waited for her to come in looking for him, and that's when he ambushed her. His father came home just 30 minutes later. Matt came up behind him and ambushed him as well. Matthew also blamed the legal system for not giving him the treatment that he needed after being found not guilty by reason of insanity in 1989. After which, at one point, he says, "I'm not a violent person." He told the judge that no one monitored him to make sure he was following through with his treatment plan. Remember I asked you whose responsibility you thought that was? He argues, well, if you would have followed through on the treatment plan, I would still have my family. Oh my God, now he's literally blaming the judge. It was said by the court that it was Matt's responsibility to follow the court order, and he chose not to. They said it's not Richard and Dawn's fault. They did everything they could for Matthew. It wasn't a lack of love. It wasn't a lack of trying. It's not their fault at all. The sole defense witness was a psychiatrist named Harry Brunt. He said Matt was insane. He didn't know right from wrong at the time of the killings, and he did not receive the proper care growing up. Psychiatrist Kenneth Weiss rebutted this and said, no, he's not mentally ill. He has antisocial personality disorder. The insanity thing does not fly for me, and this is why. Recall his parents were the ones to argue the insanity plea. They didn't want him to get in trouble. That was their defense to keep him from going to jail. So to me, that was just an excuse. That wasn't the cause of the incident with his father. That incident was caused by his severe jealousy of Josh and his perceived inferiority to his whole family. And this was corroborated. It was said there was a concerted effort by Matt's lawyer at the time and his parents to convince the judge that this was just one isolated incident because of drugs and that it was completely safe to release him. The jury did not buy it either because on Friday, December 4th, 1992, they found Matthew guilty of 12 counts, including murder, kidnapping, robbery, making terroristic threats, and unlawful possession of a weapon. Thursday, January 14th, 1993, Matthew heard that he would be facing the death penalty. He was convinced, though, that his appeal would be successful, and he said, I will not die behind bars. Now that same jury was left to decide whether he would spend the rest of his life in prison or get lethal injection. At the penalty phase, Judge Kimbyrleigha was the very first judge in New Jersey to allow testimony about adopted child syndrome. The psychologist that coined this term said that Matt fit the profile. An adopted child filled with rage who doesn't have the opportunity to vent his feelings to his family. Really though, I feel like that's all he was ever doing. I'm going to define adopted child syndrome for you. It was very difficult for me to find a reputable source to truly understand what this was, so I'm using the best source I could find. The Journals of Contemporary Social Sciences. Adopted child syndrome has repeatedly surfaced to explain behaviors in adopted children that seem uniquely related to their adoptive status. Specifically, these include problems with bonding, attachment disorders, lying, stealing, defiance of authority, and acts of violence. The term really hasn't achieved acceptance within the professional community, though, because there is a lack of data. There is a quote from Adopted Forensics by Dr. David Kirshner, PhD, that says, quote, of the 500 estimated serial killers in the United States, 16% were adopted as children. He found that adoptees were 15 times more likely to kill one or both of their adoptive parents than biological children. So there's that. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to 2 30-year terms with no possibility of parole. I thought it was odd that 10 out of 12 were voting in favor of the state's theory that Matt killed his father to cover up the murder of his mother. And then a lot of the people on the jury agreed with the defense as well, that he really did have issues from his past and being adopted. Whether we think they're irrational or not, it was clear he had issues with it. So on Thursday, February 25th, 1993, Matthew was called a danger to others by the judge and ordered to be kept in prison until the age of 80. Judge Michael Kimbyrleigha stated, cold, calculated, and premeditated murders committed less than 1 hour apart of the two people who gave you more love than anyone else on this earth. They wanted you to cease acting like a spoiled child, to stop mooching off of their hard-earned money, and to start standing on your own 2 feet as an adult. You showed your appreciation by murdering them. Matt is serving the rest of his life sentence in Kentucky State Reformatory. He will turn 51 this year. Apparently, after being sentenced to life in prison, Matthew did find his birth parents, but he does go by a new last name. Maybe it's his biological parents' last name. He has a prison pen pal account if you do want to write him. And he says he's been a dog trainer since 2008, and he's in the process of completing his master's degree and will go on to pursue a PhD. He's a hopeless optimist who hopes to find someone who can accept him for who he is, not who he was years ago. But after he was put in prison, there were some things that were revealed from the other side. In 1994, the judge pleaded guilty to embezzling $173,000 from one of his legal partners. He received probation at the time, but then in 1996, he was found guilty again of evading taxes, and he was sentenced to 2 months in prison. He died in 2002. Also in 1996, the prosecutor, Nicholas Bissell Jr., was convicted for taking nearly $200,000 from a co-owned gas station. While awaiting his sentencing, he was out on bail. He was facing 10 years in prison, and he decided to flee. Sadly, he was later found in a hotel room in Vegas. When the authorities were coming through the door, he took his own life. Matt's brother Josh became a missionary, and he has never spoken publicly about his parents' deaths. I found a clip of him. He lives in South Africa, and he preaches the gospel there. I'm going to show you that clip now.
My name is Josh Heikela. I used to be here in the Twin Cities. I'm still part of the Presbytery. I'm a pastor. But since 2009, I've been working in West Africa, a mission co-worker of the Presbyterian Church. So I'm based in Ghana, the country of Ghana in West Africa. And I always say, it's that part of Africa, the West Coast that comes out. And I work with the partnerships that we have in West Africa with Ghana, Togo, Nigeria, Niger, and Liberia.
I know this has been a long video. I wanted to make sure to tell you all the details. And in closing, I want to read you what a close family friend said. If Mrs. Heikela did anything wrong, it's that she loved her son too much, to the point where she was willing to give up her life for him. I don't believe she ever thought the boy that she loved so much would ever do this. Thank you so very much for watching and subscribing and commenting. I will see you in my next video. Bye.